morning, everyone. Welcome to Curiosity Students Question the World and Connecting Taiwan. The topic for today is NASA's mission to explore and inspire. I'm Sandy from Fujian Catholic University, and I'll be the MC for today. We've been fortunate to have Dr. Eugene L, the Center Director of NASA's Ames Research Center, to deliver his speech. Before we start, I would like to provide a brief overview of our program. Curiosity Students Question the World, as well as introduce our team. Additionally, I'll explain the process of the Q&A activities. To benefit our audiences, I will switch to Mandarin. 欢迎各位教授、同学、观众们来参加由好奇学生大哉问、大学、辅英科技大学、文化大学、实践大学、东吴大学、铭传大学、静宜大学、辅仁大学、台北科技大学、慈济大学、嘉义大学、阳明高中联合主办的好奇学生大哉问连结台湾系列专题讲座。谢谢现在线上参与的各所国内外学校学生，也感谢业界人士各位伙伴热烈响应。大家知道好奇学生大哉问的主旨是什么吗？好奇学生大哉问的主旨是建立一个活动平台，邀请海内外专业人士，透过每月一次的专题演讲，将他们的知识经验与大家分享，让同学们能够聆听前辈们的演讲，激发同学们的好奇心，自主学习并提出问题。线上的同学们知道好奇学生大哉问的宗旨是什么吗？提问才能成就非凡未来，所以我们愿意提供丰富的提问奖金，也希望各位同学踊跃参加。活动时间和呈现方式，活动排在每月第3周的星期五早上10点10分到11点45分，由线上视讯方式呈现。学生们如何参与？演讲前大胆提问，追踪我们的官方社群，社群连结都在聊天室。在 KKTIX 报名活动时提出问题，演讲者会参考提问内容，规划本次演讲。演讲中填写问题表单，让演讲者在 Q&A 环节回答问题。欢迎和感谢时可以按荧幕右下角的回应来鼓掌和谢谢。演讲结束后，欢迎参与好奇学生大哉问工作团队，学习团队合作能力。我们先请我们的节目主办人刘登凯博士为同学们介绍提问奖金的部分。有请刘博士。
好，谢谢 Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. Before I provide the information, let me say a couple of words. Dr. Eugene L, I really thank you very much for accepting our invitation to share your insights with NASA and the Ames Research Center. I'm looking forward to your talk. And I'm going to tell our students about the award that we provide to encourage them to ask questions. We have 2 groups of questions. One is before your talk, and another one is after your talk. I forward the list to you before the talk. And I will provide 3 awardees for each group. So 3 before the talk, 3 after the talk. And I will announce that at the end of the program here. And in order to encourage them to ask more questions, I'm going to switch to Mandarin Chinese here. But before I do that, I also want to take an opportunity to thanks to Dr. Wu and the director of the Taiwan Space Center for introducing you, Dr. Zhu. And due to his time constraint, he provided his introduction in the back of his car. You can see that. And we just make sure he's not driving. That's important. Okay, now I'm going to switch to Mandarin. 各位同学大家好，我们有分2类奖金，一个是在事前的这个同学提问的，那我这个提问的问题已经交给我们的演讲者这个杜博士。那么这个由于时间的限制呢，他不会说每一个问题都回答，但是呢他会整合起来给你们回答。如果你觉得他没有回答的你的问题，麻烦你在我们这个事后呢再来问这个问题。我在这里面有3名的奖金，第1名是1000块钱，第2名是500块钱，第3名是300块钱。 然后演讲后的问题也是3名，第1名是1000块钱，第2名是500块钱，第3名是300块钱。然后呢，我可以跟同学说，你可以问问题，可以用中文问，也可以用英文问。你用中文问，我们会当场帮你翻译成英文。如果我们这个翻译不够好，我们也请你来说明一下。好，那我的这个介绍就这里。I'm done with my introduction here, and Sandy, hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. 谢谢刘博士的说明。接着在这边和各位同学讲解一下节目流程。在10点50分结束演讲后，会直接开始50分钟的 Q&A 环节。如果听了讲者精彩的演讲后产生任何疑问，欢迎同学透过聊天室连结发送问题，我们将现场选出3个好问题，给予提问奖金，也会选出演讲前报名表单中的3个问题，总共6个得奖名额。问题可以包含 Dr. Eugene L 的专业领域和心路历程等方面来询问。请得奖同学活动结束后留下来加入颁奖 LINE 群，确认进入得奖 LINE 群后再离开。逾时或是没有上线聆听的同学得奖同学，奖项会被取消，以利后续奖金颁发作业。本次的演讲会以英文的方式呈现，大家可以点选荧幕最右边的3个点开启字幕哦。提问的部分还是可以用中文提问。本次的演讲由 Dr. Eugene L 带来，美国太空总署的任务是探索未来，同时鼓舞全世界。NASA's mission to explore and inspire。让我们欢迎国家太空中心的主任吴宗信主任来介绍我们今天的演讲嘉宾 Dr. Eugene L。有请吴博士。
Sandy, thank you. And Dr. Tu, and because of a student I'm most in Taiwan, and I'm going to introduce you in mentoring. And it's my great honor to have you here. I'll switch to mentoring from now on. OK， 我们今天各位同学大家好，大家早。
博士早安。
对，今天我们真的非常荣幸的邀请这个 Dr. Eugene L 他的中文名叫做杜龙蓀博士来为我们的演讲。Dr. Eugene L 他是在1988年从加州 Berkeley UC Berkeley 的分校拿到机械工程的学士BS Bachelor Degree in Mechanical Engineering 然后他在1990还有在1996又分别从史丹佛大学得到 Aerospace Engineering 的Aeronautic 的 Master 跟 PhD 的 Degree 因为这样他非常丰富的这样的academic 就学术的背景，我想他 cover 到 Space Science 就太空科学，还有 Aerospace 航太 Aeronautics， 还有一个很重要就是他现在我想英文要就是领导管理的领域，就是这个technical 的 management 的 leadership 这等等的领域为他日后在这个太空探索space exploration 的领域发展奠定了坚实的基础。Dr. Eugene L 他目前是美国 AIAA 的 Associate Fellow， 我跟他也是一样都 Associate Fellow， 然后同时呢，他担任美国的这个 NASA Ames Research Center 在西空贝里那边的一个主任这是一个非常崇高的一个position。他大概在9年前，就是2015的5月，他take 这个position 以后，我想他下面的包括工程师，还有非常附近相关的在美国相关的一些企业组成的团队，他为了过去这8、9年来，为了 NASA 还有整个美国的这个航空跟太空的任务提供了非常关键的研究以及相关开发的成果。这些成果使得美国在这个航空跟太空的事业各位可以看到这个蓬勃的发展。各位可以看到昨天这个 Starship 的发射，我想这边有很多同学应该都有仔细去看这是非常多的复杂的技术的组成。而 Dr. Eugene L 我想无疑是华裔之光他在这个航空跟太空领域的这个卓越的贡献，我想备受肯定。他曾经在2000年 获得 NASA 的杰出的leadership 的奖章并且在2009年和2020年荣获美国的总统等级的杰出行政奖跟卓越的行政奖。他更在前年，就是2022年，荣获美洲中国工程师学会的全美杰出的亚裔Asian 的 engineering 的工程师奖。他除了在科学界的成就以外，Dr. Du 他同时是一位非常极具这个启发性的，就是 inspiring 的speaker， 他是非常有名的演讲者跟教育家。他经常 constantly 接受这个受邀在各种的 academic 的 conference， 就学术会议，还有很多的活动来发表他的演讲，来分享他自己对太空科学还有领导管理的见解跟经验，来激励跟启发 inspire 无数的学生跟年轻的科学家。现在我们请各位以热烈的掌声来欢迎Dr. Eugene L 来带领我们探索这个 NASA 跟 NASA Ames Research Center， 然后同时来分享他精彩的个人的职业生涯的旅程。Let's welcome Dr. Eugene L to deliver his speech. His speech title is the NASA's mission to explore and inspire. Thank you, and let's welcome Dr. Eugene L. Thank you. Sandy, let's turn to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wu. And I must apologize in the very beginning because my Chinese is not good enough to give this talk, and that's why I will be giving this talk in English. But my Chinese is good enough to understand most of what Dr. Wu said and the very generous introduction he gave for me. And also I want to thank Dr. Dankai Liu for inviting me to speak here, and then Sandy and all the students who are helping to organize this. It really does appear to me to be a very, very well-organized event. So I'm very pleased to be here. So I am going to share my screen, and we will hopefully see that this works.
And excuse me, Dr. Du, I don't think I can stay with your speech, even I like to. And so I was trying to see you next time sometime, so I need to stay away. So.
Okay, no, I understand. And thank you very much. I'm very honored that you were able to do this even from the car. And the connection was very good. So I'm very impressed about that.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't be noisy.
I look forward to meeting you soon in the future.
Okay, sure. Look forward to seeing. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Dr. Liu, bye.
谢谢。
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and start. And my plan here is to give you a short, well, not that short, but a presentation that will cover sort of three main topics. I'll talk about NASA as an agency and what we do at NASA. I will talk about the specific center that I lead, which is Ames Research Center here in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I'm going to say a few words about my own personal journey and how I got to where I got to, and what are some of the things that I've learned along the way. And hopefully then we will have a robust period of time for questions and answers. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you provide. And my Chinese was good enough to understand the very generous award that Dr. Liu talked about. So that is also inspiring. So let me first start. I'm actually going to finish with more personal history, but I really felt I should start with a little bit of personal history right at the beginning. So this picture was taken probably about 56, 57 years ago. That is me in the red outfit. I don't know why my parents thought that was a good outfit for me, but that was me in that red outfit sitting down with my parents behind me, my grandparents standing next to them, and then my great-grandmother, who lived until about 100 years old, sitting down next to me there. And this was taken in Taiwan. So just a little bit of background. Both my parents were raised and went to school, went to college in Taiwan. They immigrated to the United States in the 60s, early 60s. And then I was born here in the United States in the East Coast, in the Boston area in 1964. Early in my days as a child, I had many opportunities to go back to Taiwan because we still had relatives there. For example, my grandparents and my great-grandmother, and then some uncles and aunts who were still in Taiwan at that time. So I had many opportunities to go to Taiwan. I learned some Chinese there to speak. And then from 1984 on, I actually did not have an opportunity to go to Taiwan for almost 20, 30 years. And so just recently, back in 2019, 2020, just before the pandemic, I did finally have an opportunity to go back to Taiwan and have we had a family reunion there. And it was the first time I brought my 3 kids to Taiwan. And it was incredibly exciting. We visited Taipei, we visited Taichung, we visited Danshui, we visited Jiufen and many other areas. But it was only about 10 days. So we want to come back and we will come back. It's an amazing place, an amazing culture. And my children in particular had a wonderful time. So that's my first step in just giving you a little bit of personal background, and I'll cover that more towards the end. So let me go into the presentation, and I'm going to start with what NASA does. NASA, of course, stands for National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It is the civilian aeronautics and space agency for the United States. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. It was founded in the late 50s, in 1959. And it, of course, has been functioning ever since that time as part of the U.S. government. So it is one of the agencies in the U.S. government, and it is funded mostly by the U.S. government. So we can certainly talk about that. But I'd like to start out by talking a little bit about what NASA does, because when people hear about NASA, they think immediately about a few things usually. They think about the Apollo program, landing on the moon. They think about the space shuttle program. They think about the International Space Station, and they might think about our missions to Mars, which are led by Dr. Liu's institution, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is also one of the NASA centers. But NASA is actually very broad. It does a lot more than those key things. And so this first chart gives you an idea of the 5 areas of NASA. The first A in NASA stands for aeronautics. And so we continue to do aviation and aeronautics research, and I will talk a little bit more about what we're doing in that area. We have space operations and deep space exploration. These are the areas that most people are very familiar with. These are the areas that focus on human exploration of space, humans in low Earth orbit, eventually returning humans to the moon, and our plans to bring humans to Mars. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. A key part of what NASA does is driven by science. And so we have a dedicated mission area called science. Most of the NASA missions, just by numbers, are science missions. Over 130 or 140 missions operating at any given time, and they're science missions. And it's science about the universe, about our solar system, and also about our planet. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we also recognize the 5th area that NASA has to be very much involved in is technology. It takes technology to do these kind of missions and explore. But we also develop technologies as part of that. And one of the missions of NASA is to provide that technology back for broader public benefit. Again, as I mentioned already, we're a civilian or civil agency. We're not a military agency. So most of the technology that we develop is intended to be disseminated back out for public benefit. So let me talk about each one of these areas a little bit. In aeronautics, one of the key areas that we're looking at is the continued advancement of aviation and flight. So this is an image of the low boom flight demonstrator, the X-59. This aircraft was rolled out right after the new year in January, and it's been built. It has not yet flown. It's still going through some tests on the ground. It's still going through some final development. But when it does fly, hopefully later this year or early next year, we are looking to demonstrate that you can fly supersonic, that's faster than the speed of sound, over land without creating the sonic boom that we know occurs right now. So you have to shape the aircraft in a certain way so that the sonic wave boom does not occur on the ground. And if you're able to do that, you actually then have the potential to fly commercially supersonic over land, which would be a great advancement. We would be able to cut most of airline travel anywhere in the world in half if you were able to fly supersonic both over land and over water. Now, many of you may know about the original commercial supersonic transport called the Concorde, which did fly for a number of years and decades. But one of the biggest challenges of the Concorde was it could not fly supersonic over land because of the sonic boom, and therefore it never was economically viable. It could never make the business case, and eventually that program ended and that aircraft no longer flies anymore. So this is really an important development. If we can show that you can shape an aircraft to fly supersonic over land, we have the potential to make economically viable supersonic transport for the future that, again, will cut travel time in half. So that's one of the areas that NASA as an agency is focused on in aviation and aeronautics. Another area that we're focused on, and one of the key areas that we do quite a bit of work on here at Ames Research Center, is called advanced air mobility. And what this really means is we all know about drones and now unpiloted vehicles that can fly in the air. And one of the things we want to research and understand is how can these vehicles really become useful, more than a hobby, more than a toy, but something that could really become useful because there's quite a bit of airspace, especially below a certain altitude, that is not used these days very much. And so if we can show that you can take advantage and use these type of vehicles for productive means, as well as they can fly safely in the airspace with both piloted and unpiloted vehicles, then we really have the potential to revolutionize the use of our airspace, whether it be for cargo delivery, whether it be for air taxis, or for first response in an emergency. One of the biggest challenges we have in the Western United States is wildfires. And we want to figure out, can we use drones and unpiloted vehicles safely in a wildfire environment to attack the wildfire much more quickly and reduce the amount of damage and impact to humans and the forests. So these are an area that we're doing a considerable amount of research in. Now, if I switch gears to the two areas of space operations and deep space exploration, we have been flying humans into space for 64 years. And it's been an incredible capability, an incredible journey. But largely, we were able to go to the moon back 50 years ago for very short periods of time. And then we've mostly operated in what we call low Earth orbit, which is very close orbit around the Earth. But we've had many, many decades, 64 years of human spaceflight experience, and including starting in 2020 with the first commercial human spaceflight launch capabilities, and that's the SpaceX Crew Dragon capability. And so you see these different missions. They started with the Mercury days. The Saturn is shown there, the Space Shuttle, the SpaceX, and then the launch of the Artemis program. So the Artemis program is NASA's program to return humans to the moon, but return them in a way that's sustainable, not just a few-day visit, but really understanding how we can live on another planetary surface for longer periods of time and for long durations. And so the Artemis program is our effort and what we've been charged to do to bring humans back to the moon. Now we're already in space and we've been operating in space for a long time. This is the International Space Station. It involves many countries with the US and Russia as the leads. There are modules from multiple countries, including JAXA, Japan Space Agency, and ESA, the European Space Agency. It is truly now a floating laboratory in space, if you will, where we can test microgravity experiments, we can look at long duration effects in space, and we can really understand how to operate in space as humans. This space station has been in continuous operations, continuously occupied for now 23 years. And so what I like to remind people of, particularly students like yourselves, many of you who are probably under the age of 23, that for your entire life, there's always been some human who has not been living on the surface of this planet. That's an amazing thing to think about. We've always had somebody in space, different people, of course. They usually don't stay more than a year, but we've always had somebody in space for the last 23 continuous years. So this is another area where we're leveraging and trying to understand how we can extend human presence into space for longer periods of time and eventually extend human presence beyond the Earth system. So in late 2022, we had the launch of the Artemis 1 mission.
And here we go.
This was the first test of the new rocket, the Space Launch System.
5.
And it was a successful launch. It was a successful test. It was uncrewed. There weren't any people on it, but it went around the moon and came back to Earth with a successful splashdown to demonstrate the capabilities of both the rocket, the launch vehicle, as well as a capsule. But this mission did teach us a lot and was very interesting because not only did we demonstrate that this system could work to get us to the moon and back, but also we had many secondary payloads or robotic payloads on this mission. And those were deployed as the capsule was going towards the moon and coming back. One of these missions was called BioSentinel. It was a mission that was led out of Ames Research Center, out of my center, and it was a small spacecraft carrying samples of yeast. And the purpose of this was to send this small spacecraft even further out into space, as far as 15 million miles away from the Earth eventually, so that we could expose biological organisms to high doses of radiation. We really needed to understand, and we still need to understand, what is the impact of this type of radiation in space on living organisms. And until we understand that, and until we understand the effects of microgravity, we will not be able to really sustain life beyond Earth for very long duration. So this is one of the key technologies in terms of biology that we have to understand if we are going to be able to extend human presence beyond the Earth system. The next mission, Artemis 2, is now scheduled for late September, and it will be the first crewed mission. In other words, will be the first time this rocket carries people. And its purpose will also go to the moon and come back, testing out the environmental control system, testing out the ability to dock and undock, and basically preparing us for the next mission after this one, which would be ideally the first landing attempt back on the moon. And when we go back to the moon, in this case, we won't be going to the same region of the moon that all the Apollo missions went to. One of the key things that we're focused on now is to bring humans to the southern pole of the moon. And you might ask, well, why go to the South Pole of the moon? One of the primary reasons to go to the poles of the moon is we now know there's actually water ice in the polar regions of the moon. There are regions of the moon, particularly in the poles, that are permanently shadowed. That means they never see sunlight. And because of deposits of comets, because of deposits of meteorites, we know now that there's water in the form of ice on those polar regions. And if we can eventually mine that water, that ice, we actually have resources on the moon that can be used to help sustain the systems on the moon. And that's what we have to understand also if we want to be able to extend humans beyond the Earth, because eventually people will need to be able to live off the resources of where they are. It is not practical nor feasible to continuously supply, like we have to do right now for the International Space Station. We have continuous supply missions to bring up water, oxygen, consumables, all of those things that a person needs to survive. The moon is probably close enough to continue to do that for a long period of time if we need to, but Mars is too far away from that, and I will talk about that in a moment. So the exploration of the moon is very different than what we've done in the past, in which we are really looking to see that we can stay for long periods of time, that we can go back and forth, that we can understand what it takes to actually operate on another planetary surface, whether that be habitats, that be power systems, rovers, all of those things that you would need, much more so than a few-day stay, which is what we did during the Apollo program. And then the analogies of why we need to understand this on the moon really translate to the same type of things I already talked about of understanding this on Mars. Because if we eventually are going to bring humans to Mars, we do have to understand how to utilize resources, how to provide power, how to move around the surface in an effective way, how to make sure that people are safe and they're healthy and they can operate and work in that environment. But of course, we are already on Mars, as we all know. This is some examples of images from the Mars Perseverance rover, which has been operating on Mars for quite some time, again, with the leadership of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the contribution from many of the NASA centers. Perseverance rover was, as a rover itself, was very similar to the previous Mars rover called Curiosity. But the instruments were very different. The location it's going to and is visiting is very different. The science objectives are different. And by the way, the Perseverance rover also carried a helicopter. This is the Ingenuity helicopter, which demonstrated you could fly on another planetary surface for the first time. This is also very exciting because if you're able to fly on another planetary surface that has atmosphere, then you are able to, of course, cover much vaster distances in a shorter period of time, and you can expand the amount of exploration you can do on that planetary surface. So there's a lot of excitement coming from the demonstration. I don't remember the exact numbers. I think originally the Ingenuity helicopter was planning to fly about 5 times just to demonstrate that it could fly. It was so successful that I think it ended up flying over 70 times. And not only did it do more, not only did it demonstrate that you could fly, it actually became part of the mission. It actually went out and scouted ahead for areas that we would want to bring the rover to and explore. So something that originally designed as a proof we could do it and demonstrate it actually became a very useful tool and had been an integral part of the mission. Unfortunately, on its last mission, not that long ago, it took a hard landing. And part of the reason it took a hard landing was because we knew we had accomplished all the goals of the mission of the helicopter. And so we now wanted to test how far we could push the envelope of flight. And so we were pushing it a little harder. And it took a hard landing, and eventually one of the rotors had broke and cracked. And so its life is done, its job is done, but it's been an incredible part of the Perseverance Ingenuity mission. So I already mentioned this a little bit. This is not something for you to read, but just to every one of those words up there is a NASA science mission, whether it's around the Earth, on the moon, on Mars, or looking out into the solar system or the galaxy and beyond, or a mission to the sun. Understanding our sun is also very important in understanding our whole solar system here and the effects on Earth. And the point here is that if you look at this, actually over a third of all of NASA's science missions are Earth science missions. So one of the questions that we often get at NASA is, how does this benefit us here on Earth? How does it benefit life on Earth? Well, space is an absolutely unique and great vantage point to study the Earth. And so we have many missions now and planned for the future that are looking at the atmosphere of the Earth, that are looking at the oceans, that are looking at the land, that are taking measurements to help us understand really what's happening to this planet, and eventually provide information that can be used to understand, well, what can we do about what's happening to the planet? So whether it's changes in climate, whether it's rising ocean, whether it's temperature, the melting ice, whether it's higher carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere, these are things that the NASA missions are studying and from space, and can really help us understand how to take care of this planet as we move into the future. So I want to finish up this part of the talk with a reference to a mission that kind of brings many of the technologies I talked about together. So this is a mission called Dragonfly. This is a mission that has been approved. It hasn't been launched yet. Its launch is scheduled for later this decade, and it will take on the order of 8 years to arrive at Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon. And the purpose of this mission is to look at Titan and as a potentially moon that could support life or could have had life in the past. It has a very thick atmosphere, and it is something that scientists are very interested in studying the organics of this moon. But this mission is very complicated. And so what you're looking at here is both a diagram as well as an animation of how this mission will be conducted. So we will enter the Titan atmosphere, and we will deploy a nuclear-powered octocopter, so it's a drone, before landing. And so as the capsule is descending through the Titan atmosphere, this drone will get deployed in flight and start to fly around and look for a safe place to land. As you could imagine, that's an incredibly risky mission. It's an incredibly challenging mission. The distances from Titan to Earth are such that all of this will have to be done autonomously. Even the distances from Mars to Earth, which is closer, requires us to do all the entry and landing elements autonomously. The time delay, which is based on the speed of light from Mars to Earth, can vary, but typically is around 10 to 20 minutes. And to enter the Martian atmosphere and land on the surface typically takes about 7 minutes. So by the time we get the signal of we're entering the atmosphere, the lander has already landed, right? We just haven't gotten that message yet, whether it's landed safely or not. So there's no way to operate this, teleoperate this, or joystick operate this. This has to be done completely autonomously. And the same thing is true on Titan. The entry to landing here is actually more like 100 minutes or longer. And so this is a much slower entry. It has a much thicker atmosphere, but it's no less challenging. And in particular, because we're trying to deploy a flying vehicle right as it's entering the atmosphere and before it lands. And then another mission that actually we at Ames are leading is called Helioswarm. This mission is a group of 8 spacecraft, small spacecraft, and 1 center spacecraft or we call it a mother spacecraft. And what this mission will do is study the turbulence in the space plasma coming from our sun. And the reason we want smaller spacecraft is because you can't just take a measurement in one location. It's like studying the ocean. It's better to have many buoys in the ocean with different locations so that you can get information from many different locations and put that all together to understand what's happening. So this is a mission where it's going to be very interesting because we're going to have multiple spacecraft that need to talk to each other, that need to position themselves relative to each other in space, and then need to provide the data and the scientific information back as they're operating. Okay, I'm going to now shift to the second part of the talk, where I'm going to talk about NASA Ames Research Center. This is the center that I lead, and this is one of NASA's centers. So it is actually one of 10 centers that NASA has across the country. So these are all the centers and their locations. And so Ames Research Center is in California. There's 3 NASA centers in California: Ames Research Center, the Armstrong Flight Research Center, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, that I've already mentioned. So NASA Ames Research Center is in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're actually right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so that actually brings us some huge opportunities here, because being right in the middle of Silicon Valley, we have many companies around us who are in the high-tech industry, who are interested in advancing knowledge and technology and interested in applying that technology. So we have many partners here in Silicon Valley where we're right in the middle of this location. We partner with all the other NASA centers. All the NASA centers have to work together because the missions that we do at NASA are so complex and so large that no one center has all the capabilities you need. Many of the centers are very much focused in one area or another. The Goddard Space Flight Center and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, are primarily science centers for NASA. They run NASA's science missions. Some of the biggest missions they run, for example, at the Goddard Space Flight Center, they run the James Webb Space Telescope. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, they've run almost all our recent missions to Mars, as an example. Then we have some NASA centers that are primarily focused on human spaceflight: the Johnson Space Center, the Kennedy Space Center, the Marshall Space Flight Center. These are primarily centers that focus on the large rockets and the human-rated systems. And then we have the research centers, of which Ames Research Center is one, where we work across all the domains, whether it be aeronautics, whether it be space exploration, whether it be science. We provide the technology and the research that informs many of the missions across the agency. A little bit of our history. We started in 1939. We actually started 20 years before NASA started. We're the second oldest center in NASA. And when we started, it wasn't NASA, it was NACA, the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics. And it was primarily focused on aviation and aeronautics and aircraft. And then when we became part of NASA in the late 50s, we also got involved in the science and space missions of NASA. And these are just some pictures of what it looked like. If you've ever been to the San Francisco Bay Area and to our area here, it doesn't look like this today. It's very crowded now, all cities around us, but this is what it looked like back in 84 years ago, 85 years ago, when they first broke ground for this Ames Center. This is what our center looks like today. You are looking north up the San Francisco Bay. So San Francisco is about an hour north from here, and San Jose, another large city in the Bay Area, is about 10 or 15 minutes south of us. What you're looking at is the core part of the center. The large structure on the upper left there is the largest wind tunnel in the world. You can put a full-size 737 aircraft inside that tunnel to test it. We also have many smaller tunnels that are usually higher speed tunnels that can go less than the speed of sound or faster than the speed of sound. And then we have a lot of laboratory facilities as well as computing facilities to help do the mission that we do for the agency. We have about 3,000 employees, and our budget is about $1 billion US per year. These are the 8 core areas that we at NASA Ames Research Center work on, from air traffic management to entry systems. Entry systems is the development of materials and the study of those materials that are needed to protect a spacecraft when it enters an atmosphere. Entering the Earth's atmosphere or entering the Martian atmosphere or entering the Titan atmosphere creates a lot of heat and a lot of energy that has to be controlled and protected. Otherwise, the spacecraft will burn up. The main reason we don't get many meteorites that hit the Earth or asteroids that hit the Earth is because most of them are small enough when they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they burn up. But we don't want our spacecraft to do that, right? And so we have to develop the materials and test them so that they can actually protect the spacecraft from entry. Much of the work we do nowadays is based on computing, modeling, and simulation. Supercomputers are very useful tools. It's very expensive to run a test in a wind tunnel or actual flight test. And so you use computers to model it, to understand it, to try to decide where you want to do your testing. You're still going to have to do testing because the computers are only going to be as good as your models, and they are never 100% accurate. So you need to still do testing in order to understand physics, what is really happening from an engineering perspective. The intelligent and adaptive systems area is where we do our work in AI, in robotics, in autonomy, because many of the things we do now, particularly in space, have to be autonomous. And that's another area where we benefit with technology development, what happens here on Earth. So we talk about self-driving cars now. Well, we've had to have self-driving or self-flying robotic missions for decades. And so we've developed or need a lot of that technology that if you can develop it for space applications, now they become also useful for applications here on Earth. And then in the lower section of this chart, cost-effective space missions is where we're looking at smaller scale space missions, ones that are cheaper, ones that maybe are willing to take a little bit more risk. Many universities now can develop a small spacecraft that can fly, and students can learn about building a spacecraft and what it takes to fly a spacecraft. That was something that could not be done decades ago, right? Now we're in the world where a student project can result in a spacecraft that will then fly or get sent to the International Space Station and deployed in orbit and tested. So there's huge opportunities for everyone to get experience and training and understanding of what it takes to build a spacecraft mission. The aerosciences area is one where we continue to do the modeling and we continue to do the testing to understand to improve our understanding of aviation and aerodynamics. And then we at Ames also have some key areas in sciences. And one of the key areas I'll focus on here is in life sciences. Understanding what happens to biological systems when you go into space, in a microgravity environment, in a high radiation environment. Those are things that we have to study and understand before we will be comfortable putting humans into those environments for long periods of time. So we also have many facilities that we need to operate. Many of our engineers and scientists work in our wind tunnels. The ArcJet complex is the complex that tests for the entry conditions for the materials, high temperature materials. We have human in the loop simulators, and these are really important because we also know with increasing autonomy and increasing AI that one of the biggest challenges is how humans will work with these systems. In fact, if you look at the mishaps that occur or the failures that occur, many times it's between the human and the system itself, not the system alone. The human is part of that system, and many people argue that the human is the least predictable part of that system. And so we need to bring humans into the loop. We need to understand how they will operate these systems because in order for that to be successful, it all has to work together. And then we also host the primary supercomputers for NASA. So the entire agency has use of our computer systems here at Ames Research Center. And then we have a host of laboratories that take care of our science work as well as environments to test our spacecraft before we launch them into space. So in our wind tunnels, we do a significant amount of wind tunnel testing. That picture on the upper left there is the largest wind tunnel in the world that I already mentioned. This, in this case, is a parachute test of a capsule, but you can see the size of the people there and the size of the wind tunnel that's there. Of course, we have smaller tunnels when you get to higher speeds, and so we have other tunnels that do a significant amount of testing. The heat shield development that I mentioned already is a key area of what we do at Ames. We focus on materials that will protect spacecraft as they enter another planetary atmosphere or return to Earth. And so most of the materials that are used by any US spacecraft came from our center. Even the ones that are done commercially, like SpaceX, their Dragon spacecraft heat shield material actually came from Ames. And then we also leverage our computers and our modeling simulation environment to truly understand from a modeling perspective what will happen when we are launching our vehicles, for example. So this is a very detailed simulation to look at the launch of a vehicle and the pressures, the acoustic waves, the heat, all the environments that have to be protected against, because this could actually damage the launch vehicle before it gets off the launch pad. And so these are some key simulations that are done to help us understand that, as well as once we get up into the atmosphere and we have to look at the separation of the rockets, or we have to look at a launch abort system, understanding the fluid physics. Air is a fluid. And so understanding the physics of that, the complex physics around it, is one of the key things we use high performance computing for. And then finally, just to cover two more areas at Ames. One is in the area of space biology. So our center has sent the most number of experiments to the International Space Station related to biology. And so we've sent rodents or animals, we've sent fruit flies, we've sent microorganisms, all to understand the radiation and the microgravity environment that we want to basically have a full understanding of when we send humans further from the Earth for longer durations. So really understanding the biology and how that is affected by space is a key area of our research. And then just to circle back to the resources that I talked about. So we're running a mission called Viper. This will be the next NASA rover to go back to the moon. It will hopefully go later this year or next year. And it basically will prospect. It will search for water. It has a drill. It has a neutron spectrometer. It has a near infrared spectrometer. And it basically will be landed on the South Pole, near the South Pole of the moon, and travel to look for water ice and where, how much there is, how easy it is to get to. It's the first step to understanding what resources on the moon could potentially be used to help us explore, stay there and explore further beyond the moon. This mission is also exciting because the lander for this mission is actually going to be provided commercially. So NASA is building the rover, and we're buying the lander to provide us a landing on the moon, and that it has to be developed at the same time. So there's a lot of things that have to come together for this mission to work. So I'm going to wrap up with just a few slides to talk a little bit about my own journey. Many people ask me if I was always interested in aviation and space, and the answer is yes. When I was young, engineering and things that could fly and airplanes were always interesting to me. And so that's one of the areas that I pursued. And one of the reasons why I got into engineering when I started college. And one of the key things I did in college was between my second and third year in college, I interned at NASA Ames. And so I got a research internship here. And I started basically understanding the work environment while I was still going to school. And that was really helpful because it really helped me understand why I was learning these things in classes. Many times you learn in school about things and you're probably wondering, why am I learning this? Why am I going to need this? This theory in mathematics sounds so abstract that it really, how could it possibly be helpful to me? Well, if you actually have an opportunity to intern or work in a related environment while you're in school, you will have that opportunity to understand why your coursework is so important. And you also will have an opportunity to understand what the work environment is really like. Not only was I able to work an intern, but I was able to publish papers before I even graduated from college. When I did graduate, NASA Ames offered me a job, but they also offered to pay for me to go to graduate school. And so as an opportunity I took, I started at Ames as a junior researcher. I went through graduate school at Stanford, but NASA paid for that as well as paying my salary at the time. So it really was a long-term journey from when I started. And one of the things that I often talk about, and maybe is the message that I will provide, is that I didn't think I would be going into leadership or management. I really felt that I wanted to do research for my entire career and maybe even teach eventually. But there were opportunities that came up for me that led me down the management and leadership path. And I ultimately understood at the end of the day that I could accomplish much more in a leadership role because I would be enabling a team of people to do things. And the type of things that NASA does is so large and so complex that no one person can do it all, right? And so it really takes a team, as I know Dr. Liu will say from his experience at JPL. You know, it takes thousands of people sometimes to put together these missions, and having somebody willing and interested in leading the group of people and inspiring them to take those risks and opportunities that come forward is also very rewarding for certainly it was for me. So that, I think, is the end of my presentation. I apologize, I went a little bit long, but hopefully I've left enough time to have some questions and discussions. So I think I will, should I stop sharing the charts? And then we can, I'll turn it back to either Dr. Liu or to Sandy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Eugene, too, for your wonderful speech. And now we will move on to the Q&A session, which will last about 15 minutes. I would like to briefly explain the process in Mandarin. 我们现在进入到 Q&A 环节，到11点40分。如果现场有任何疑问，欢迎利用工作人员背板上的 QR code 或聊天室的 Q&A 表单连结问问题。问题被挑中，线上参与的观众可以打开麦克风与讲者互动，并追问一题。如果没有问题，也请说 Thank you, Dr. Tu。实体现场提问的同学，听到我喊到你的名字的时候，请到台上拿麦克风，站在镜头前与讲者互动。互动当下可以追问一题，如果没有问题，也请说 Thank you, Dr. Tu， 并回到座位。目前问题的数量有点少，所以欢迎大家踊跃发问，可以用中文提问哦。那我们请宇恒播放第一个问题。Okay, the first question is from, sorry, I'm not sure, FASCA Caden 10. Despite great challenges posed by Asian Americans living in the US, how were you able to be successful in the realm of aerospace, especially that of a government agency, NASA? What challenges did you face and how did you overcome them? Okay, That's welcome, Dr. Tu.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk about that. I think, you know, for any group of people, whether it be Asian Americans or African Americans or Hispanics, there are always challenges when you're in the minority, right? And there are always challenges when there are stereotypes of what a certain group is good at or not good at, right? And so one of the challenges posed out there, particularly in the United States, is the view that that Asian Americans are really good at the engineering, but they don't really want to do the leadership or the management or the things that require you know, interacting with people. And so it's something that you have to understand. It's something that you have to challenge yourself and train to push back on and to basically demonstrate that you have the skills and the capabilities to do those things that some people might not think you do just based on your background, right? Based on your ethnicity or based on your race. And I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about NASA is NASA understands, our culture, I believe, understands the value of diversity. And the reason we understand the value of diversity is because NASA, if you think about it, almost all the missions within NASA are either first of a kind or one of a kind missions. We rarely do the same thing more than once. Even if it looks like the same thing, like I mentioned, Curiosity and Perseverance rovers on Mars look like the same rover, the instruments were different, the science objectives were different, the location we fly to were different. And so every mission is different. And because of that, there isn't a one way and only this way to do any sort of mission. In fact, many times when we have a new mission, we don't know how to do that mission. We need the best ideas and the best thought and the best engineering and science to come up with the right way to do that mission. And that comes from people with different ideas, and people with different ideas come from people from a diversity of people, right? So people who have different training, people who have different background, people who grew up in different environments, people who had different experiences are the ones that will generally come with different ideas and different approaches and different ways to look at a problem, and often come up with that idea that will solve the problem. So that's why I think for a government agency, particularly like NASA, where it's almost a requirement, the ideas that come from the diversity of our people is almost a requirement to be as successful as we can be. And so that's one of the things I think that I've really appreciated in my career, at least here.
Thank you. 请问 Caden 同学有在现场吗？如果在现场的话，请到台上和讲者拿麦克风和讲者互动。如果是线上参与的话，请开启您的镜头和麦克风与讲者互动。可以追问一题，如果没有问题的话，请说 Thank you, Dr. Tu.
你可以听到我吗？
Yes, we can hear you.
我还有一个问题，
Okay.
就是在 NASA 这个机构里面，你最喜欢的是哪一个部分？然后你为什么很喜欢在一个政府的机构工作？
Okay, maybe I can translate. Which parts of NASA do you like the most, and why do you like to work in a government agency?
Yeah. So one of my favorite parts of NASA is the people. It's not a typical government agency, right? And many government agencies are regulatory by nature or enforce laws or set policies. But NASA is very different. NASA's mission is discovery, is science, is to bring understanding and knowledge to what we don't know and don't understand. If you look at the core missions of NASA, whether it be in aviation to advance aviation and aeronautics, in space and space exploration, it's to understand the universe, understand the origins of life, understand or find life elsewhere, and understand what's happening to our planet. So that to me is what's inspiring about working for this agency. And to have a government agency that does have that focus, does have that long-term objective. Now, there are challenges, right? Even though we have a long-term objective, because we're a government agency, our budgets are year to year. And so every year you might have a 10-year mission, but every year you have to advocate for and find out what your budget's going to be. And sometimes if the budget doesn't match, then you're going to have to stretch your mission out longer, and there's a lot of uncertainties. NASA also tends to be, unlike other parts of the federal government, tends not to be political, in the sense that NASA typically gets support in Congress from what we call both sides of the aisle, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. NASA typically gets support. And so I think it is a government agency, absolutely, but it also transcends some of the politics involved in most government agencies. And space exploration, in many cases, transcends or goes beyond even country borders, right? Many of the things we have to do internationally. We have to do with international collaboration because no one country has all the resources. If you think about it right now, the US and Russia don't have many areas where we agree and collaborate. One area where we do continue to agree and collaborate is in space exploration and on the International Space Station. It's because we have a mutual dependence there. If either the US or Russia were to stop supporting the International Space Station, the International Space Station would have to come down. And so it's in the mutual interest of both countries, and both countries are able to collaborate in an environment where there aren't many other things that we are collaborating on. So the other exciting part about NASA is, even though it's a government agency, it really has broader appeal and doesn't just serve the US, even though its primary purpose is for the US.
OK， 好，
Yeah,
好，谢谢 Dr.
thanks for
Eugene too.
Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt just a second here. Kaden, 请问你那个单位是什么 ？FASCA 是哪个单位啊？
就是 FASCA San Francisco Bay Area。
再说一次。
San Francisco Bay Area 的 FASCA 就是那个，
就是海外青年文化大使旧金山分会。
对，就是那个。
OK， 好。So you're next door to Eugene's base here, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, thank you. And next slide, please. 好，我们下一题，谢谢。Okay, it's from Taiwan Space Generation Andy Wang, and thank you for the informative and inspiring presentation. This is Andy Wang from Taiwan Space Generation, a local youth NGO advocating space affairs and international engagement. I understand NASA as a very strong arm for young talent incubation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate more on the activities and how it benefits NASA and daily work? Is there any specific initiatives open to international students and youth that Taiwanese students and young professionals can apply? Another question is again on talents. From your position, do you see shifts in skill sets needed for future space professional? If so, can you suggest what are the key areas next generation space enthusiasts to look into?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of questions in that one question. So let me try. First of all, yes, it is true that one of NASA's missions is, I call it to inspire the next generation of explorers, right? And so we know what we do at NASA, and the whole notion of exploring space and is a long-term endeavor. And many of our missions are multi-year, sometimes multi-decade missions, and the whole objective and goal could be easily multi-generational. So inspiring that next generation is a key area for NASA. So one of the ways we do that here at Ames is engaging with schools, engage at all levels, from what we call K to 12, which is kindergarten to 12 or high school, and of course universities, undergraduate and graduate level, and even postdoc levels. The things we want to do there, or we need to do there, is to really, in some cases, inspire people to go into the right fields. And even that definition is changing, in my view. It used to be all the right fields would be what we call the STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But I believe the future of space exploration is going to need many fields beyond that. We're going to need lawyers to help us understand what are the laws and treaties that need to be developed for space exploration, especially if there are going to be resources there. We're going to need business professionals, finance people, because much of the work that we're doing is becoming privatized and commercial. And so how do you make money? How do you create a business in space exploration, right? And so these are examples. We're going to need artists. We're going to need communicators, because it doesn't work if it doesn't work well if only the scientists and engineers understand what we're doing, and we're not communicating to the broader public. So I think it is something where many different fields, and so I'm trying to touch upon this last area here, many different fields and professions, I believe in the future could be relevant for application in space exploration, if that's your interest. One of the key things I try to encourage students to do is in addition to becoming an expert in maybe the domain of their study, you need to be also you don't have to be an expert, but you need to become knowledgeable about broader domains. Many of the challenges we're facing, and I'm not just talking about for NASA, I'm talking about as a society, as humanity, are challenges that are going to require multidisciplinary solutions. They're not going to be solved by any one domain or one area of expertise. And so the more the next generation of professionals can have skills and become aware of many different domains, you'll be more prepared to address some of those challenges. And not necessarily because you have to do it all, but you're going to have to work with others. If you're a physicist, you may have to work with a chemist. You may have to work with a biologist. You may have to work with an engineer. You may have to work with a lawyer and a business professional, right? So becoming at least aware and more knowledgeable about other fields, I think, is something that people should really try to do more of. And that's one of my advice that I give folks. The question about international students applying and being able to join or work with us, we do have a program called the International Internship Program. But it requires host countries to sign up to that program. So it could be something that I try to talk to Dr. Wu about, because usually it's an agreement between the space agencies of a country and NASA. So we do have that program where we bring in international students and international interns to NASA, and it could be something we take a look at. And so that's another area that we'd love to explore.
Yeah, sorry, my camera's a bit broken, but my microphone is on, and this is Andy from Taiwan. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that, and I think it's very informative. I just want to have some context, like why I bring this question.
Okay.
Because in Taiwan, we see there is more discussion on space affairs, like how to bring in space science with this different other fields, like as you mentioned, lawyer, law, business, politics. So I just want to know, like, if we zoom out a little bit from the U.S. standpoint, like what kind of initiatives in the nationwide are the states developing? And I mean, space affairs is quite a broad topic itself. So within these subtopics, what are the key priorities the U.S. is looking into right now?
Yeah. So there's several. One of the priorities that the U.S. has in civilian space exploration is, as I mentioned, the Artemis program, returning to the moon, and also eventually setting the stage for us to bring humans to Mars. Another priority is in understanding the Earth and the climate, and that, of course, is shared by many countries and areas around the world. And so we have many international partnerships in those types of missions as well. We also have a priority in terms of advancing aviation and aeronautics. And that's another area too that maybe at some point, as I mentioned, if it's for commercial flight or cargo flights or aircraft, it again crosses international boundaries, right? Because a lot of aviation is domestic, but a lot of aviation is also international. When we look at the safety of our air traffic management system, it's not good enough for just one country to have a very safe air traffic management system. We need the whole world to, because our airplanes fly everywhere, right? And people travel everywhere. So these are just some examples. Some of the other priorities, in addition to the ones I mentioned, are really understanding life, where else life could exist. The search for life is one of the things that NASA is very much focused on, particularly in the science areas, looking at whether life could have or previously existed on Mars, whether it exists in other places in our solar system. And really that comes back to understanding how life formed on Earth, and also what's the future of life on Earth, right? And so that's another key area. But I think to your broader question, almost many of our large scale missions have some level of international partnership, because again, you know, the NASA budget is only 0.5% of the entire U.S. federal government budget. It's about, right now, I think the budget that was just passed is just under 25 billion US, which is a very small portion. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually a very small portion of the federal budget in the US. And so there's only so much NASA can do by itself. There's only so much the US can do by itself with that level of investment in space exploration. So international partners that share a similar interest, that bring resources to the table, that maybe are willing to develop one major component of a bigger integrated system, you know, those are the type of partnerships that NASA is currently engaged in and is often seeking in the future as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for the inspiring, very informative sharing. I think the Q&A time is quite limited, so I'll just leave it here, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And next question, please. 下一题，谢谢。Okay, question from Pascal and Ryan Chung. What scientific objectives do you prioritize when designing missions? What role does artificial intelligence play in NASA, such as in data analysis or operating machinery? What are the most promising technologies being developed to sustain human life on other planets?
Okay. Let me see. Let me take the first one. So the scientific objectives really depend on the mission. And the way NASA does most of its science missions is it puts out what we call an announcement of opportunity. And so then people then bid on it. They basically provide a science, a mission concept that will answer a certain science question. And then they will, propose the cost for it. And then they will end up competing that against other proposals. And NASA ultimately down selects to the ones that will actually fund and become a mission. Now, the science objectives themselves come from generally a process that we call the decadal survey. It's a process by which led typically out of the national academies in the US, where scientists every 10 years in different disciplines and domains, whether it be astrophysics, whether it be earth science, whether it be heliophysics, planetary sciences, all these different domains of science that NASA is involved in, scientists get together and come out with a consensus of their top priorities of what they want, questions they want answered in the next decade, in the next 10 years, and the type of missions that could potentially be done to answer those questions. So NASA gets its priorities from the science community, and then generally puts out an announcement of opportunity for the science community together with the engineering and technical community to propose missions that will meet those science objectives. So that's generally the process by which here in the US we prioritize scientific objectives. Artificial intelligence, or what we often call autonomy, has played a role in NASA missions for a long time. And partially because it's out of necessity. there's a couple things that are key for most of NASA's missions. First of all, as I already mentioned, the distances and therefore the communication delays are such that you do always have to design some level of autonomy into the system itself. You cannot operate everything from the ground, typically for our science missions. The International Space Station is actually mostly operated from the ground, of course, and also with the crew on board. But our robotic science missions go further out than just low Earth orbit in many cases. And so we have to have some level of AI for these missions. And then the part about data analysis is also key because in many cases, like for example, in our Earth observing missions, we bring back so much data, we store so much data that we need AI and machine learning to help understand that data and to turn that data into knowledge that then the scientists can actually understand and pull out information from. So that's a key part also because of the huge amounts of data we usually have. Most promising technologies, that's an interesting question. I would highlight two things. One thing is, in order to sustain human life on other planets, at least initially, we're going to have to understand how to keep them healthy and to keep them functional, right? And so if you think about technologies like remote medicine, if you think about technologies like diagnostic tools that don't require a medical expert to understand, these are the type of technologies that we're going to need to sustain human life on other planets, but are also needed here on Earth, particularly in the rural areas, in the communities where they don't have immediate access to the best hospitals that maybe are in the urban areas. And so I think that's to me a very promising technology. The other promising technology I'll highlight, and I'm just picking two out of many, is there is no greater need to be sustainable than trying to live on another planet. The recycling of the water, the recycling of the air, the recycling of minimizing waste. You know, you have to be as sustainable as possible because of how difficult and how expensive it is to actually bring resources there, right? To resupply all the time. And so as we develop the technologies that would be needed to sustain human life on another planet, that sustainable technology, you know, recycling 99% or 99.9% of the water, for example, could have huge benefits here on Earth. Because we also know that we're, you know, all the resources are not unlimited here on Earth, and we need to be able to live in a much more sustainable way on this planet. So I think some of the drivers of developing those technologies are what we need to do to sustain human life on other planets will benefit us here.
Okay, thank you. And it's Ryan there. Ryan 同学在吗？
我在这里。
Okay. 好，那请问你有其他的问题要问讲者吗？不然就是说 Thank you, Dr. Tu 就可以了。
No, I don't have any more questions. Thank you, Dr. Tu.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. And next question, please. 好，我们下一个问题，谢谢。OK， 来自北科大机械工程系的张忠瑞同学。When you graduated with bachelor's degree major in mechanical engineering, why did you choose aeronautics and astronautics? Okay, to complete your master's degree.
Well, I have two answers to that question, and they're both valid. So the first reason was that the school I went to did not have an aeronautics and astronautics degree. So UC Berkeley, at the time I went, they do now, by the way, but at the time I went there, did not have a separate aeronautical engineering degree. So they had mechanical engineering, which is very close, and maybe a little bit broader, because under mechanical engineering, you learn about structures, you learn about fluids, you learn about thermodynamics and all the areas associated with mechanical engineering. And quite honestly, you will need to learn all that for aeronautics and astronautics as well. And so at the bachelor degree level, mechanical engineering was broad, but also pretty much aligned with most of what you would learn in aeronautics and astronautics. But my interest was in aeronautics and astronautics. I knew that was most likely specifically what I wanted to study. And so when I went to graduate school, I went to Stanford, which did have an aeronautics and astronautics program. So that's where I went for my master's and my PhD. But in other schools where they have mechanical engineering and they may not have a separate aeronautics and astronautics, you would get about, I would say, 80% or more of the same education and coursework by completing a mechanical engineering degree. There may be some specific courses in aviation and aerodynamics that you might not get, but most of the coursework would actually be quite similar in mechanical engineering, especially if you focus on an area that is aeronautics and astronautics related, like structures or fluid.
Okay, thank you. 请问张同学有在现场吗？
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
I hear you.
Okay, so I got one more questions.
Sure.
Compared to other questions, this might be a bit silly, but this is my childhood dream to ask a NASA scientist about aliens.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a whistleblower about there's a couple UFO crashes in America. And did you ever detected a possibly living creature or UFO in the deep space?
Well, I'll give you a funny answer and I'll give you the real answer. The funny answer would be if I did, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But that's not the real answer. The real answer is no, not to my knowledge. And so here's how I generally answer that question. Do I believe there's life elsewhere? Absolutely, I do. And I'll tell you why. The numbers just boggle the mind, right? The numbers. So we did a mission at Ames called Kepler. This was a mission to look at a very small part of the sky, maybe stare at about 100,000 stars, and look to see if there were planets around those stars, just like the planets around our sun. And we were astonished by what we detected. We always believed that there were planets around other stars, but just looking at that small part of the sky, we ended up detecting many, many more planets than we thought we would. And we would only detect the planets because of the design of this mission. We would only detect the planets that cross in front of the other star and block its light momentarily, right? So it had to be edge on. And so we would miss many other planets that were orbiting like in a different way. So based on the numbers, and based on that mission that lasted, I think somewhere around 8 or 9 years, we now know that there are more planets than stars. When you look at the sky and you see stars, just think about the fact that there are more planets than stars. Most stars have planets, and most stars, like our sun, have multiple planets. Now that takes us to the second question. How many of those planets could sustain life? Or life as we know it. And that question really hovers around how many of those planets are like Earth size, because if the planets are too big, then they're like a gas giant, like Jupiter or Saturn. And if they're too small, they're basically not going to have an atmosphere, right? Or other features that you need. So how many planets are about Earth size? And then how many planets are close enough to their star or at the right distance from their star so that the temperatures could sustain liquid water? Because we do believe for life as we know it that you need liquid water. So that's called the habitable zone. And so when we look at those numbers and we looked at the number of stars we looked at, I'm going to give you the bottom line. The bottom line is just in our own galaxy, there are probably billions of planets that could be Earth-like, that could be the size of Earth and could have the right temperature range that Earth does to sustain liquid water. So, and that's just only in our galaxy. And then, of course, you look at how many galaxies there are in the universe. So just by the sheer numbers, I absolutely believe life exists elsewhere. I don't know what form it is. You know, I don't know if it's like us or if it's microbial organisms or something else, but I absolutely believe life exists elsewhere. Now, here's the second part of your question that's challenging, though. Even if we're sure that there's life elsewhere, the distances are so great in the universe and in the galaxy that the chances of that life coming here during the period of time that we've been aware of UFOs and other things is actually very, very small chance. It just takes so long to travel those distances, unless somebody, if you watch Star Trek, has figured out how to go faster than the speed of light. If you can't go faster than the speed of light, then those distances are so great that the chances that they could travel here in the short window of time that we've been aware of ourselves and life, I think is a very, very small chance. So I believe there's life out there, but I don't personally believe they've visited us or crash landed here and we're hiding them. Hope that answered your question.
Okay, thank you for
and
answering.
that's my personal belief. So I'm not sharing the official NASA position.
Okay. Thank you for answering, Dr. Chu.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are running out of time, so we need to move on to the next session. And other questions will be answered in after 11:45. Okay. 不好意思，我们的 Q&A 时间差不多结束了，那我们现在要到下一个阶段。Thank you, Dr. Tu's wonderful talk about NASA and the Ames Research Center's space exploration. Of course, we love your story about an intern to the Center of Director. It's an amazing story. I am sure all the audience will remember your story and hope they will learn how to achieve very similar things. Now we would like you to share your takeaway message for our students.
Okay. I hope I'm not breaking the rules, but I actually have 3. And so these are the messages I want to share. My first message is, to the extent possible, I think my advice is to pursue your passion. Find out what you're interested in, find out what you're passionate about, and try to pursue that. We all know, and I come from a family that was very much about, making sure you're successful. A lot of doctors and lawyers in my family, engineers, but I happen to be one who loved engineering and I was able to pursue it. But I also am a strong believer that you won't be doing your best work unless it's something that you enjoy doing. And we just spend too much time working in our lives that if you don't enjoy what you're doing, I think you're not living life to its fullest. So my first advice, which many parents may not agree with, is try to pursue your passion. My second advice is never stop learning. No matter what level you're at, you of course are learning now because you're in school and you're required to learn. But once you're done with school and you start to work in the workplace, never stop learning. Always assume you have more to learn. Always be willing to learn more. Always be open to others teaching you something you don't know. Because no matter what, you won't know everything. You can't know everything. And so always be open to learning. And even as a director of the Ames Research Center now, I am learning new things all the time from my staff and from others that are interesting to me. And so if you can be interested in learning more all the time, I think that will serve you well. My last bit of advice, a takeaway message, is, and this came from my own experience, as I mentioned, I thought I was going to be doing research my whole career. I thought I was going to be teaching maybe later in my career. I did not think I wanted to go into management or leadership, but there were opportunities that came up for me that I took, and I took the opportunities for those, even though they weren't necessarily something I was originally thinking I wanted to do. So seriously consider those opportunities that come up that might be a little different than what you thought you wanted to do, because many times they will broaden your experience, or they will even support in a different way what you want to do, but they might provide a a different perspective on things. So throughout your life and career, you are likely to have opportunities that'll come up that you might initially say, that's not what I want to do. Think about it, right? Consider it, because some of these opportunities may really take you in a new and better direction than maybe if you ignored them or you passed on them. So those are my 3 takeaways.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Tu. Let's give Dr. Tu our biggest round of applause to express our sincere appreciation for his insightful speech and invaluable contributions today. Okay, and let's move on to the last part of the seminar. I will switch to Mandarin again. 又到了公布得奖名单的时间，有请 NASA 喷射动力实验室的刘登凯博士为我们公布得奖名单。
好，感谢这个 Sandy。在这个事前提问我选出了3个。第一名是这个静宜大学乐写中心的廖怡佳同学。他这个问题很长，我就没办法全部都念出来了。基本上他就是说，你这个到外太空这个探险这个知识有什么用没有？那我想给他这个第1名那第2名的话，我给这个也是静宜大学的同学，那么是林佩玉同学，说你为什么会对于这个这方面有兴趣的 ？OK， 所以我就给他这个我想那个刚刚 Dr. Tu 有回答这个东西OK。那么这个第3个我就给这个也是静宜大学法律系的他是说你想问 NASA 这个 Inspire the World 跟 Explore the Future， 那我想同学刚刚那个杜博士有回答，一共是3个那么这个现场问的问题真是很厉害OK， 所以我这个考虑了再三。那第1个同学呢是给这个 Ryan Chen， 他在设计任务时候考虑哪些项目？我觉得这个让 Dr. Tu 答得非常非常好，这个问题非常好，所以我就让他拿第1名了。那么第2名的话是这个是叫做 Andy 王，对不对？这是属于 SFBA 不是 FASCA 的。那么他问说台湾学生和青年专业这个如何参与这个东西，我觉得很好。I really would like to see that Dr. Tu and you and Dr. Wu reach agreement such that we can have a Taiwanese students participate in some NASA. And I know they tried to participate in JPO, but they could not make it. So I would love to see that, and I will do everything I could to help on that one. That's really good. I appreciate that. 所以这个第3名的话，我给2个，因为这问题都很好。那么第1位是这个 FASCA 的这个 Caden Tan， 他说那个如何面临哪些挑战，如何克服？我觉得这个是非常好的问题。然后同时我给了一个这个北科大的张仲应该是怎么念呢？张仲木还是玉为什么选择航天来完成这个硕士学位？我觉得最主要是你问的 alien 的问题，我觉得你的 alien 问题是让你得到这个第3名那个 I love Dr. Tu's answers. I think I'm totally agree with him. That's most of the answers that I would give that to. And I know my friend John Cassani gave the same answer, very similar answer. So all the people who work for NASA will believe that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's 一共是4名。Okay, I'd like to take this opportunity to thanks again, Eugene, and this is a really good talk. I enjoyed it very much. I took a lot of notes. So I was thinking about it. One of these days, I probably will organize a team here, go camping out in front of your door, either at the NASA center or your house. We're going to ask you, day and night, keep going to ask you a question. That's kind of my dream here.
Oh, well, wonderful. I'd love to do that. Or we could just go to a restaurant and have dinner or something.
Absolutely. Okay, have 3 meals, right? No problem at all. Yeah. Okay, thanks again. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, and I appreciate all the great questions.
Okay, let me hand the meeting back to our host.
Okay, 谢刘博士，恭喜以上获奖同学，请得奖同学透过荧幕上的 QR code 进入得奖赖群，确认进入得奖赖群再离开，以利奖金颁发作业。大胆提问，才能成就非凡未来。4月份的演讲将由台湾科技发展中心史丹佛分院主任 Laura A. Smolier 演讲在全球矩阵中台湾下一代领袖和企业家的机会，来自矽谷的观点。再次感谢 Dr. Eugene L 介绍人吴宗信博士、本次与会的学校、同学以及来宾们，欢迎大家填写回馈表单，让我们能够做得更好。最后，在这里要感谢本次活动中参与幕后筹备工作的师长同学们，欢迎师长同学们在我念到您的时候可以挥挥手，让大家认识您哦。感谢大同大学的何明果校长。OK， 感谢电算中心包昌龙主任，感谢课程李尚林老师，感谢录影于佩轩，感谢与我们合作的辅英大学陈义谦老师，感谢东吴大学秦玉国老师，感谢静宜大学陈明柔主任、建慈老师，感谢辅仁大学周德莲老师，感谢文化大学邹忠义老师，感谢实践大学朱良芳老师，感谢铭传大学网络电视转播，感谢慈济大学江允志老师，感谢台北科技大学秦先玉老师，感谢嘉义大学王明宇老师，感谢本次的工作人员，负责各项联系事宜的林小丽，负责宣传的黄玉祥，及负责确认设备的状况的林宇恒。最后感谢大家今天的参与，大胆提问才能成就非凡未来。我们4月份的演讲再见，拜拜。好，那接下来的时间我们会请 Dr. Tu 继续回